Can I regret that the First Minister yet again has failed to rise to the level of events? Does he not see that today actually is a great day for the United Kingdom and a great day for Wales? Because what we are seeing here is the beginning of a process of the restoration of democratic self-government to assemblies such as this, where we have ministers who make decisions and are held to account for them, and if we don't like what they do, we can vote against them, and that's a privilege also that the people will have on a regular basis in the form of elections. So is that surely not an unambiguous gain for this country, whatever view we have? Of course, I don't expect the Welsh Regionalist Party opposite the European Regionalist Party, which is the excuse for the Welsh Nationalists opposite, to understand that. They would far rather that we were governed from Brussels than from Cardiff. But surely the Welsh Labour government should take a more sensible view. One of the reasons why, if this is the case, the First Minister has not been listened to by the Prime Minister, no doubt is because he's still refighting the referendum campaign. And he is the voice of doom and gloom. He makes Gordon Brown look positively cheerful in comparison. He sees none of the opportunities and all the potential problems. Nicola Sturgeon uses the process for political posturing for a referendum that she actually doesn't want to have because she knows she will lose it. And surely if we want to play a full part in the process of negotiation with the UK government about the future after we leave the EU, the time to do that on a positive basis is now, and not constantly harping on the negatives and the uncertainties which exist come what may. And it's somewhat rich for the First Minister, as the leader of the Conservatives pointed out, to complain about not being involved in the process when he has resolutely set his face like flint against the involvement of other parties other than Plaid Cymru in the process of negotiating a common position which Wales could have vis-à-vis the UK. As regards full and unfettered access to the single market, insofar as that means free trade, he knows that the government is already committed to trying to obtain that objective, and it's in the mutual interest of both parties, the EU and the UK, that it should be secured. We have a massive trade deficit with the EU, amounting to 60 billion a year. In cars alone, we have a 20 billion a year deficit with Germany. So there is a massive bargaining counter that we have in our hands in the negotiating process. And yet the First Minister, all he can say is that we won't be able to sell any cars because there might potentially be a 10% tariff on cars. Well, we've already seen an 18% devaluation in the pound in the last 12 months anyway, which more than compensates for that compared with where we were last time. Of course, there will be problems for agriculture in the way that he describes, but it will be within our competence here in this place to decide how to deal with those places. He will be the leader of an administration which will have complete control of agriculture as a result of our leaving the EU, and I wholly agree with him, and I wholly agree with the point that he made, that there should be an immediate repatriation of powers from Brussels to Cardiff, where that is appropriate under the devolution settlement we already have, and that there should be no blockage in Whitehall or Westminster in the meantime. As regards a transition process lasting more than 2 years, a lot of people will see that as a thinly disguised ploy to try to keep us in the EU for even longer than the process which is set out under the Lisbon Treaty, and that there should be no prospect whatsoever of elongating the negotiating process, because a Parkinson's law might then come into play, whereby the work expands to fill the time available. An infinite amount of time will mean an infinite extension to the time that we remain members of the European Union. There's plenty of time now for the Welsh Labour government to develop lines of policy which they would like to see. For example, in agriculture, what kind of subsidy regime do we want to have in Wales after we leave the EU? That will be something which will be completely within his control. I do agree with him that we need to sort out the funding of future policy, and I agree with both Plaid Cymru and the government that we should have every single penny that has been sourced via Brussels, and all British taxpayers' money in any case, but every single penny of that should come to Wales, whether it's for agricultural support or structural funds or whatever, and it should then be for the Welsh Labour government to set its own priorities in the light of that, and the Welsh people can take their own view on whether those priorities are right or not at the time of the next Assembly elections. As regards the Constitution, I again wholly agree with him that the devolution settlement must not in any way be undermined. But what is happening now through the triggering of Article 50 is that we're actually enhancing the devolution settlement. We're actually enhancing the powers of this Assembly, enhancing the power of Welsh ministers to govern ourselves in a way. And this is the paradox of the nationalist, so-called nationalist opposite position, of course, is that they don't want to have the democratic institutions such as the National Assembly of Wales deciding what our environmental policy is going to be, what our agricultural policy is going to be, and so many other areas of policy which are currently the preserve of the European Union. So I say to the First Minister, do cheer up. You know, this is a great opportunity for us, as well as a challenge. Of course, there are challenges and opportunities in life in general, but surely the opportunity to strike free trade agreements with the 85% of the global economy which is outside the EU, given that the United States takes 22% of Welsh exports, for example, is there not a great opportunity there to plug into the process of negotiation on free trade agreements in order to ensure that the UK government, negotiating on our behalf in a unitary state insofar as we still are one, takes Welsh interests fully into account? But they're unlikely to do that if he carries on with the dire dirge of doom and gloom which we regularly get day in and day out in Wales, and he was at it yesterday in question time. And today, WTO rules would be a disaster for Wales. Well, the average tariff under WTO rules is about 3.5%. Admittedly, they would be higher for certain sectors which are important for Wales, such as automotive, and agriculture, which is, generally speaking, as the First Minister said, not the subject of agreement in free trade agreements. But surely the opportunity from being positive rather than negative is to play a real part in the process of negotiation with the UK government. And if he carries on as he is, then he will continue to be ignored.
Well, I have to say